The massive cosmic shift of May 31, arising from the full moon alignment of Antares and the moon in Ophiuchus, opens a profound purity portal that will trigger a reckoning and burn illusions. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Star Kittens community where we discuss 13 sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior and the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the Ophiuchus full moon conjunction with the fixed star Antares. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share and subscribe. There's a lot going on, so let's jump in. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
This is the 11th episode of 2026 and we are recording it on the 22nd of May. I love these double numbers. It's a special full moon reading because the full moon happens at 1 degree Ophiuchus with the sun sitting at 16 degrees Taurus. Here in New Zealand it happens on the 31st of May at 8:45 p.m. And today we're going to talk about a body in the night sky that we haven't actually discussed before, and that is the star Antares. Would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, so I've heard of Antares and was very aware that it existed. But you're right, we've never spoken about it in our blogs. So there's always a first for everything, and it's the first time for Antares. And I'm looking forward to discussing this fixed star. The other fixed stars that we have sometimes referred to in our readings are, of course, Sirius, which is a fixed star, and Taurus. And there's some others as well. But today is all about Antares. So I thought that what would be helpful, just to get us all on the same page, and to align with what's out in the ethers and out in the public sort of domain and in the cyber world that is the internet and so on, and what's lurking in the generators about this. And I thought a good place to start would actually be to talk about, firstly, the mythology of Antares. So the history of the star. So what is being written about Antares as a fixed star before we go into an astrological interpretation, because I think the two things are linked. We often say in our readings that having an awareness of the mythological and the historical context of some of these deities, these stars, these cosmic bodies, helps then to understand and interpret the astrological, because when we go back in history, often these things were intertwined. There wasn't a sort of a silo, if you like, between mythology and astrology. They were kind of the same thing, or two sides of a coin. So I like to tease out often, and we'll do that for this Antares, something of the historical and mythological and cultural ideas that are out there already about Antares, and then we'll talk some more about the spiritual and the astrological interpretations as I feel they apply at this full moon. It's a full moon, right?
Yes.
So what we know about Antares is that it is commonly referred to as the heart of the scorpion. And I know I've been caught out with this myself, that as a stargazer, I love looking at the night sky, that often our eyes are drawn to the red planet or a red star, and a lot of people who do stargazing with the naked eye anyway will think that Antares, because it's coloured red, is actually Mars, or Mars is actually Antares. They're both red, And there's some very strong correspondences because of that. And of course, in history, the Mars energy and the Antares energy were often interchanged, and so you will typically hear of references about Antares being either a cousin of or closely related to Mars and the warring energy of Mars. So the heart of the Scorpion, Antares, a blazing red supergiant star in the sky, actually in the constellation of Ophiuchus. In ancient mythologies, it is said that this fixed star, Antares, was heavily tied to, and I've just mentioned that, or corresponded with, or linked to Mars. And so therefore it served as a celestial symbol of war, of passion, of ambition, of drive, of those masculine energies, the get up and go energies. Also the primordial spark, the idea of red being a primary colour, and the idea of Mars being a warrior planet really relates to ignition and starting and something, that activation process. So Antares, Mars, again, they're very closely linked. The colour red, it's all to do with drive, war, passion, ambition, but also the mythology and the story of the extremes of the heights of success and the depths of despair. You know, there's lots of expressions about, oh, that person was at the top, on top of the world, and now, you know, look at them. So it refers to that story and that kind of cyclical nature of how people can rise and fall, how civilizations can rise and fall. Antares is all linked with that idea. So its mythological and cultural footprint was through the lens of different cultures. So let's have a look at what the Greco-Romans, or the Greeks and the Romans, they used to call Antares a rival of Mars. So not Mars, or not a cousin of Mars, but a rival to Mars. And in the Greek language, the old Greek language, Antares derives from a word which I cannot pronounce, but it translates to quote unquote rival to Ares, who was the god of war. And both of these, the planet Ares and the star Antares, because of their distinct fiery red colour or hue, ancient observers believed that the fixed star Antares was a direct competitor to Mars in the night sky. And as I said, if you're looking around, you'd actually be able to locate both of them. If it's a clear night sky, you'll be able to see Mars and Antares. They're both red in colour. In Hellenistic astrology, which is Greek astrology, a very old system, the stars' blended energetic nature is famously categorised as a mix of Mars and Jupiter. And that represents the balance between the destructive warrior instincts and broad-minded liberal leadership. And when we were talking about that before, I said that might be personified, if you like, in a general who, on the one hand, understands that he or she commands an army, but on the other side, they are aware of the geopolitical and the leadership qualities that are required to manage an army. So they are not all gung-ho and push forward at all costs. They will be much more considered. So Antares has a kind of Jupiter-Mars energy blend in the Greco-Roman culture or interpretation or history, mythology. When I was looking at this too, I found it very interesting when there was discussions about Persia, because Persia, of course, is today's modern-day Iran. And they refer to themselves as Persians, one of the oldest cultures on the planet, and they have a very strong relationship with Antares, which in the Persian culture, again modern-day Iran or Iranian culture, Antares is and was revered as one of what they called or considered to be 4 royal stars. So there are 4 stars that acted as celestial guardians. So for the Persians, Antares was considered to be a celestial guardian watching over them from the heavens. But also, it was one of 4 such stars watching over various cultures. Antares being the watcher of the west, and it's linked to the autumnal equinox. Aldebaran is another fixed star which is linked to the watcher of the east and the vernal equinox. Regulus is another fixed star considered to be the watcher of the north and linked with the summer solstice, and Fomalhaut is considered the watcher of the south and the winter solstice. And in fact, if you go into any depth of history and mythology with various indigenous races, they will often refer to one or all of those royal stars, which were used as navigation points as well for the sailors and those that were out in the boats. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, and again we are going back to the Middle East and the cultural and the mythological references and what is written historically about Antares, they considered Antares to be a goddess and a protector. So again we see this kind of guardianship energy around the star, as opposed to Mars, which most would not consider to be a guardian, but more of a warrior in that sense. But long before the Greeks named Antares, in Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, and then the early Babylonian era, the astronomers recognized this star, which they didn't call Antares, but later was assigned the name Antares. So the Babylonians, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians considered also that star to be the heart of the scorpion and associated it with the scorpion goddess Ishara. In Egypt, Antares represented the scorpion goddess Serket, and she was considered to be a potent deity of healing and protection against venomous stings, and also tied to ceremonies honouring the goddess Isis. Anyone who's done anything or any work with the Sophia code will know about Isis and the Egyptian goddesses. And then finally, the metaphysical meaning of Antares. In esoteric and astrological traditions, Antares is viewed as an intense purity portal. And I was looking at that thinking, what does that mean? So this mythology of the star teaches that to achieve great honour and success, one must first harness the ruthless energy of Antares. So the drive, the ambition, the get up and go, the courage, the willingness to confront adversity. So that is a precursor to honour and success in the mythology and the metaphysical meaning of Antares as it is written historically. So therefore Antares symbolises the courage to cut through illusions, and in doing so we are offered the opportunity to deeply transform our reality and to go through a rebirth of sorts in our awareness as we navigate extreme challenges. Now we're going to talk some more a little later in the next pieces about where the moon is the repository of soul, and therefore the repository of both individual and collective memory, is where some of these illusions come from. So we often are dealing with illusions, deceptions, dysfunction in our lives because we have unresolved issues sitting in what we call the moon energy, or the repository of soul, which is unconscious energy. So there's a very much a link between Antares and the moon, and of course they're conjunct at this full moon. But for Antares to awaken in us, it has to be stirred up by either the moon, the sun, or Uranus, either touching it directly as a conjunction, as we're seeing here, through an opposition, as we're seeing with Uranus on the other side, with the sun and Uranus together. Antares is a dormant energy, if you like, insofar as it only activates under certain circumstances. And here's the mystery: we don't know when and how, or how often, or if at all, Antares will be activated as an energy in our personal charts or certainly in the collective charts, it does get activated. But for you listening as an individual, and I'll touch on later just briefly, everyone has an Antares position in their houses. So the house that it sits in is the area in which you can be awakened to a very profound event that shakes you up and changes the course of your life in the context of that house in such a way that you never look back. You go, wow, at the time it might seem like an Antares type event activates us, but here's the thing, it's a dormant energy and it only gets activated occasionally, and for some people not at all. So that's part of the mystery of this fixed star.
Yeah, and just for people that would like to have a bit of a visual, so using the 13 sign chart, the fixed star Antares sits at 2 degrees Ophiuchus. Do you want to share any of your own interpretation of Antares in the Ophiuchian energy?
Well, for me, that Ophiuchus energy sits in my 7th house. And so the Antares energy, if I'm interpreting that, so the first thing I'll go is, where does Antares sit? We know it sits in Ophiuchus. And which house is that? So for me, it's my 7th house. For you, it was what? Your first house. So what that means, through an interpretation, is that in the context of the 7th house, which is the house of what we call contracts and commitments, which is serious committed relationships that aren't necessarily romantic in nature but are typically romantic in nature, 7th house. They may also be a committed business relationship, whether it is a contract or commitment. That's our interpretation of 7th house energy, the energy of Libra, is that from time to time I may experience a profound meltdown in the context of that house. So either in the context of an existing relationship or a business partnership. Now, in thinking about that, if I go back to when I was younger, I certainly had a business partnership that went through what I would call a divorce type experience. And it shaped and changed my reality so profoundly. I remember having a discussion with my dad about it at the time, and he said, these business partnerships are like marriages. And he wasn't a spiritual man at all, but little did I know or understand actually that could in fact have been the manifestation of a Antares type energy. And what Antares is saying here is, when confronted with something so existential, so dramatic, you have to have the courage, the drive, the fortitude, the guts, the willingness to stare that issue down. Because as traumatic as it can be or may be in the context of the house in which it manifests, on the other side of it is freedom from something that prior to that experience there was some illusion or deception or unawareness or dysfunction that I wasn't prepared to acknowledge, and it took a triggering of the Antares energy in that 7th house context for me to stand up to that and face it and deal with it, even despite the fact that everything was melting down around me. So an interpretation is that, as I said, that may or may not have happened. A part of the key of Antares and Ophiuchus is that we're dealing often with a lack of awareness. We're dealing with a lack of consciousness. And when Antares in this full moon is conjunct the moon, we're dealing with an amplification of that lack of awareness, because the moon, and we talked about this at length previously, but also we talked about that moon card. When you look at the moon card, it has so much rich representation, but so much of it represents unconsciousness. And if an Antares activation is going to happen, something will emerge from our unconsciousness. And in this case, it will be from the soul, from our collective or individual soul, but not always. So the prerequisites for an Antares meltdown, and therefore which the reverse is the way that we are to respond to that, is as a warrior, is as a courageous individual, is to stand up, put our shoulders back, face into it, be assertive, courageous, confidently push through whatever the issue is. That is the energy of Antares. But it is blended, of course, with this Ophiuchus energy, which we're going to touch on a little more later. But essentially the thumbnail, the cliff notes of the Ophiuchus blending with Antares, which always happens because Antares is in Ophiuchus, is that when confronted with a meltdown and then we respond courageously as a warrior would to that meltdown in the context of the house in which your Ophiuchus energy is, and it will be one of those 12 houses. For you it's the first, for me it's the 7th. For somebody else it's the 8th or the 3rd or whatever. What this promises is if you approach it in the right way, if you, as I was talking about with you, with your Antares position, being on your rising sign and in your first house, this is the house of personality and projection. That means that something could come at you from the external world that forces a profound reckoning with who you think you are in the world. If the first house is our identity, the first house is the mask that we show to the world, that we wear, the hats that we wear when we go out into the world, as opposed to the 7th house, which is the opposite of the first house, which is who we are in private very often, which is where these close, committed personal relationships get to see the other side of the ascendant. And that's why the 7th and the 1st are very interestingly linked. The first is their outward experience, so an Antares position there means that you may or may not, and it is determined by the soul and your purpose for being here and your level of awareness in a spiritual sense. But let's say you get triggered by something externally that leads to a meltdown in your identity. And for many people going through such a dramatic, traumatic event of their identity collapsing, for whatever reasons, they just feel like they've just lost their way. A first house Antares would say, be courageous, stand up and stare into it, find your inner fire, which is your inner truth, and only then can you push through it and transform it and come to the other side of it better, stronger, and more confident. The flip side is if you don't tap into that Antares energy, for you, with it being very close to Scorpio and Ophiuchus, of course, you've got that Scorpio energy there as well, is that you could be swept away by an event to the extent where you're emotionally lost in the drama and the trauma of that event, and you never access your Antares energy. And this is why they call it a purity portal. In order to purify, what are we purifying? We are purifying ignorance. We are purifying a lack of awareness. We are purifying dysfunction. We are purifying something that is dark, meaning that we are not willing to confront it or to look at it. So in a sense, Antares in Ophiuchus, which is its correct position in the 13 sign system, although we were talking about it before in the 12th sign, they say Antares is in Sagittarius. Well, Sagittarius is of the mind and of the beliefs, but for us, 13 sign Antares is actually in Ophiuchus, which is a completely different energy to wrap around such a fiery, assertive star, which if left to its own devices could be incredibly destructive. So if I just quickly play that out on our first house experiences, if I didn't tap into my Antares when I had a breakdown in a business partnership, which was profound, which changed my life, I could have been lost and bitter and angry and all the shadow side of the Aries kind of energy, which is anger and bitter and twisted and wanting revenge, as opposed to turning it around and saying, no, I'm going to be strong, I'm going to be assertive, I'm going to be confident, and move through this step by step and access the Ophiuchus profound divine knowledge that Ophiuchus has to offer to us, divine feminine knowledge, which is wisdom. You combine those two, you can overcome anything. And then you look at that first house experience, you have let's say something triggers you either inwardly or outwardly, emotionally, spiritually, physically, psychically, you get triggered, you face a meltdown, you have a crisis of identity, and a loss of confidence. You can become swept away in the anger of it and the blaming and the victimization, which is the shadow side of the Antares, or you can stand up to it and say, thank the universe, and then tap into the Ophiuchian energy of wisdom and Mother God's wisdom to help you transform that into a positive experience and to remove the darkness that was holding you back prior to that event taking place. So that would be a first house, seventh house interpretation.
Thank you. And it's another one where if you would love to know where your Antares sits, hit us up for a chat. And it's just at the beginning of Ophiuchus. So it could be in one of the 12 houses, and it will just be such a beautiful piece of knowledge to have for your own divine design for this lifetime. So we've briefly mentioned, I'll just continue with giving people just an oversight of the chart. So this moon is at 1 degree Ophiuchus, Antares is at 2 degrees Ophiuchus. Then on the other side we have the sun at 16 degrees Taurus, making a conjunction with Uranus at 8 degrees Taurus. Where would you like to go now?
So let's talk a little bit more about specifically Antares and Ophiuchus. So just to quickly recap, Antares, red, symbolizing passion, ambition, courage, assertiveness, and the concept of rise and fall. Right, so we can rise and fall. And its role in mythology as a watcher and a protector, and actually as a template for naked ambition and drive, the willingness to cut through illusion, dysfunction, and spiritual deception in our lives. And one of the illusions is that, of course, references to Scorpio for Antares in the 12th sign is in fact incorrect. Even that alone might be something that somebody has to confront. Antares is a fixed star that is located in Ophiuchus. So let's talk about Antares and Ophiuchus. I consider Antares to be, if you were talking about the idea of cause and effect, like something happens, and which is a cause, and then we have to respond to it, which is the effect. We respond to the effect of it, the ripple of that. If Antares represents the initiation of something where we are likely to fall, and I've just touched on it, the Antares energy is tied with rising and falling. So Antares represents the cause of something happening. Then Ophiuchus is part of the effect and dealing with the effect. Now Ophiuchus is, the mythology of Ophiuchus strongly revolves around Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. And in fact, this is always something I've found very interesting when we talk about the Ophiuchian energy, insofar as if you look at the caduceus, the medical caduceus, and you see a staff with a snake coiled around it, that is Ophiuchian energy, but it is renamed as and the Greeks took the Ophiuchus originally was assigned to that rod and snake. The rod represents the spine And the snake represents the serpent awakening, i.e. the kundalini awakening. So the joining of the root chakra to the crown and above. In fact, that symbolism of the caduceus, of the rod and the coiled snake, actually represents the Ophiuchian awakening process. So in history, the Greeks swapped out the idea of Ophiuchus and renamed her with a male deity called Asclepius. That is so important to understand why Ophiuchian energy is often related to, quote unquote, the healing energy. So let's explode and explore that just a little bit. For me, healing, and this is an art and a craft and a passion that you follow, of course, integrative healing. But to me, what is healing? And if I look at what are we healing, we are healing or restoring or bringing together something that is broken. So I call Ophiuchus the integrator. But of course, the opposite of integration is disintegration. So where Ophiuchus as the 13th sign that has no opposite in the astrological mosaic, and this is what trips up their 12 signers, is because they don't want to include Ophiuchus as the 13th sign, because the nice, neat 12 sign, 1 opposite 7, 2 opposite 8, 3 opposite 9, 4 opposite 10, 5 opposite 11, 6 opposite 12, that gets all messed up in that system when you put in a 13th sign. So the way that I integrate the 13th sign into the 12 houses is that Ophiuchus energy is the energy of integration. And the opposite of integration is disintegration. So therefore, something is disintegrated, it is broken, it is dysfunctional, it is not whole, it has come apart in some way. So the Ophiuchian energy, which is the feminine energy that balances the masculine energy, helps to restore anything that is broken, dysfunctional, disintegrated. And that is how I lead myself to the point of merging, rather than throwing out the baby with the bathwater and saying, actually, how can we take that Asclepius energy of the healer and the caduceus and the rod and the snake, with the rod and the staff, and the feminine awakening that happens with the masculine, modality of healing. I join the two together and I say, actually, the masculine and the feminine are the keys to integration. So no matter where your Ophiuchus house is, that is the house where you are most likely to experience disintegration and therefore integration, depending on which house it is. And therefore it is important to understand when talking about Ophiuchus and Antares being a trigger event, a metaphor of a trigger event that leads to a meltdown, which leads to disintegration, which then leads to the flip side, and this is the duality of the rise and the fall, where the fall would be represented by the Antares triggering, something profoundly shakes us up. Ophiuchus is the rising energy. Ophiuchus is the balance to that brings us back to a place of integration. So Ophiuchus works perfectly in any house, therefore, because all you need to do to understand how does Ophiuchus energy in fact impact me as an individual, and in listening to this interpretation or any interpretation about Ophiuchus, you simply have to say, in which house does Ophiuchus exist? And of course, with 13 signs in 12 houses, that means that there are going to be houses that have multiple signs. Like your first house, because of the size of Scorpio being only 7 degrees, you have 3 energies in your first house. So that's possible. Wherever there is an Ophiuchus energy, it will be a split house. So this is absolutely core to understanding Ophiuchus and therefore Antares, the rise and fall energy. So if she is the ultimate alchemical elixir, if you like, she is what you add to a situation of dysfunctional disintegration or something is broken in order to make it whole. And Antares in terms of a metaphor, would represent the raw, intense, and often dangerous venom, if you like, the crisis, the trauma, the destruction. So something poisons our reality. Something burns our reality. And when we're talking of the moon, to add another layer to this, that venom, if you like, may in fact come from our soul. So the soul gets triggered by, in this case, the Uranian energy on the other side, which is an awakener and an enlightening energy. And something emerges from our soul, from the depths of our soul, which we weren't even aware of, but it tastes like poison to us. It tastes venomous to us. And in looking at it that way, we can embrace and integrate the history of Asclepius, who was the bastardized name, the changed name of Ophiuchus, which was the healer. But Asclepius, interestingly, as I said before, he was the Greek god of medicine who learned how to conquer death by watching a serpent heal another with a rare herb. So he was in touch with how to use shamanic and medicine and natural remedies to deal with anything, which I think is beautifully highlighted here, because of course the sun opposite is in Taurus, which is the physical world. So an Ophiuchus Antares represents an alchemical transformation, and it signifies an individual that must face an extreme life-altering crisis, Antares, in order to unlock a profound spiritual or physical healing power. That's really awesome. But then let's take it another direction. Merging this Ophiuchus and Antares, if Ophiuchus is this integrating energy and Antares is this ruthlessness, this drive, this passion, this warrior spirit, this assertiveness, this confidence, the masculine energy. Ophiuchus is a sign often associated with uncovering secrets, psychology, and piercing the veil of the unknown. Therefore, Antares, added to that, contributes a fierce, unrelenting obsession to win at all costs. An interpretation of that astrologically would be that this person is an uncompromising seeker of truth. And it suggests somebody, an Antares, Ophiuchus energy, will be somebody who acts to deeply dive into whatever it is that has come up in their lives that is so threatening, that is so venomous, that is so poisonous to them. And, you know, as I said, this can apply to any house. We talked about the first and the seventh house before as those experiences, but let's talk about a second house, Antares, Ophiuchus. Experience might be a complete and utter meltdown in your resources or finances. Bankruptcy, a loss of a house, whatever, something so dramatic. You know, you get utterly swept away. Well, here you would need to have the Antares ruthless energy to dive into what's the cause of that? What was driving that? What was behind that? That's the Antares energy. And as you push into that, then the Ophiuchus wisdom will begin to just permeate that experience. Just like if you had a glass of ice and you pour water into it, and the water just finds its way into all the little crevasses and the cracks, and eventually the water begins to take over the whole ice, and the whole glass turns into water. That would be a great metaphor of how Ophiuchus seeps into our reality, but you have to have that ruthless drive of Antares to get to the bottom of what it is that's melted down. So that's the key. So when it comes to spiritual warfare and shadow work, in 13 sign systems, our system, Ophiuchus is the bridge between the underworld of Scorpio. So this applies very much to you, Sun. Scorpio being the depths of reality, the unconsciousness. Ophiuchus sits as the bridge between Scorpio and the higher heavens of Sagittarius. Antares acts as the fiery anchor at the base of this bridge. It means that spiritual evolution cannot be bypassed with toxic positivity. So that's an interesting one too, because often people think, if I just have a positive mindset, if I just focus on the sunny side, the rosy side, and that can actually be toxic to us. So toxic positivity is actually the antithesis of honest self-awareness and relentless pursuit of truth. So Antares and Ophiuchus, if Ophiuchus acting as a bridge between Scorpio and Sagittarius, which is the higher mind, then to achieve the wisdom of Ophiuchus, a person must forcefully confront and integrate their deepest shadows, their obsessions, and their ego drives. So if you have an awareness of where the Ophiuchus house is for you, then you have an opportunity to unlock and access a great deal of wisdom in the event that you have a meltdown. So Antares, to summarize, represents a catalytic event, and that is amplified and added to when we have Uranus opposite the Sun, if Uranus is the awakener, but also when we have the Moon conjunct Antares and Ophiuchus, because the Moon represents our soul, our both individual and collective soul. So something could emerge from the external world or from our internal world. And this is talking about Antares and Ophiuchus, is about how we respond to what we consider to be dangerous situations, toxic situations, poisonous situations, and how we can choose to respond. If the Moon represents unresolved trauma that exists at the level of the soul, it may have been there may be something that presents with this energy that may have been there lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So in a sense, Antares and Ophiuchus in the house in which it sits, for the context, can feel like you're meeting with destiny. But when we're meeting with destiny, we have to have that drive and passion of the warrior and the energy to push through that trauma, to overcome those limitations and to vanquish the ghosts of time. So an issue with Antares, Ophiuchus opposite Uranus and the Sun and Taurus, there's a very circular energy before, and I talked about Uranus is, if we talked about 4 steps of energy moving through those 4 planets, Uranus would be an awakening experience. It would go opposite to Antares, which would activate in us a need and a desire to be courageous and assertive as a warrior to deal with that. When dealing with that, we might be that activation of the Uranian energy may be activating something in our soul. So in a memory and experience that we've forgotten about, that is unconsciously hidden to us, it emerges in such a way in the context of one of our houses that we are forced to deal with it. We have nowhere to hide. And then the Sun, of course, gives us this courage. And once we've dealt with the activation, we've confronted it, we've pushed through it, we've drawn on the wisdom of Mother and Ophiuchus, we find ourselves in the Sun in full expression. The Sun is the fullest expression of who we are. But to get there, we had to do some clearing, some cleaning up, some reintegration, some restoration, some recalibration, whatever words you use to choose to use to describe this experience. So we're talking about an awakening and a reckoning with the past, and the demands on us with Antares, Ophiuchus, Taurus, Sun, Uranus is reconciliation, is healing, remediation of the soul. Something unconsciously emerges from the depths of our reality. Therefore, it exists beyond time and space, and therefore this experience is quantum in nature. Occultists, there was a couple of things I'd say just to wrap this up. Occultists, the dark side of this is that they will twist and distort the truth of Antares, especially conjunct the Moon in what they consider to be Sagittarius. Sagittarius, a fire sign, and ruled by Jupiter. And so for occultists, using the dark energy of Antares, they would consider to be this an opportune time for a military strike. And then when we think about the mythology of Persia being the modern day Iran and Mesopotamia and ancient Greece, it seems to me that what's coming up potentially at this full moon, with all of these conjunctions, especially with Uranus there as well, is that we could see a reignition of hostilities in the Middle East. Strikes. See, the West see Antares as a cue to engage in war or a call to arms, whereas the Persians, the Iranians, see this as a guardian looking over them. Finally, the house, I touched on that. It is so important to understand where this takes place, which house it is. I touched on the first and the seventh, sharing our own reality of that. But this is where a transformation of your reality can take place. This is where a dormant energy may be triggered. But I have to say and stress that this might not happen ever. Or it may happen several times or once or twice. We don't know. Because when we're dealing with soul energy, we don't actually know what's in our soul unless we really spend a lot of time, and we don't have in the busy lives in the West, we don't have the time to navel gaze and to soul gaze. We just don't. So sometimes we just have to deal with what comes up. And we're talking about overwhelming waves of emotional, spiritual discontent that can hit us. And we can become enslaved in that crisis, but our response with Antares is don't become enslaved, don't become a victim. So we're talking about these primal scream experiences, dark night of the soul type experiences that are very cathartic. They don't feel like it at the time, and there's a breakdown and we're never the same again. We come out the other side, provided we approach it as a warrior would approach it, and then we invoke the wisdom of Ophiuchus. See, here is the final piece for me. If we are following the 12 sign system and we believe that Antares is in Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is what we call the higher mind. Sagittarius energy is opposite the energy of Gemini. On the one side of 3, and then the opposite of that is Sagittarius. So Gemini is data collection, left brain, rational thinking, critical thought, reason. And then Sagittarius is the full arc of that, if you like. That is where the better you are at learning and digesting and joining the dots, the more you can put together a philosophy in Sagittarius. So if we are dealing with a meltdown, a primal scream, a dark night of the soul, a complete breakdown in our reality in one of those houses, and we are in the 12 sign system, then our immediate recourse with Antares in Sagittarius is to go to our mind to resolve it. Because that's what Sagittarius is, it's the higher mind. But if it's in Ophiuchus, which is the true position, then our recourse is not the higher mind, it's actually the wisdom of Mother God. Well, how much more effective is the wisdom of Mother God? You give me a game, I'll take Ophiuchus, you take Jupiter and Sagittarius, and we'll see who's better at resolving a problem. The wisdom of Mother God will always trump everything else. So, this, if we have an experience, and it could be collective or individual, it will feel like there's some kind of destiny behind it. And that's why I touched on, it wouldn't surprise me with the Uranian energy, the Antares energy, and the links in mythology to war and Persia and Middle East and the West and the guardian or the watcher of the West. Do the Persians consider Antares to be, they say it's the watcher of the West, the guardian of their bloodline, of their area of the world that they inhabit? Are they saying that they believe that this Antares energy will watch over them? Or are the West looking at the other personification of Antares, which is the warring Mars side, and saying, we're ready to go. This is a call to arms. This is where we get our honour. We are honoured by going to war, because there are actually people in the West that believe that. So there's two sides to this Antares energy. There's a deeply spiritual, mythological energy, and there's a real blunt, raw, aggressive, powerful, expansive energy, which I believe represents the Western military system, particularly the United States. And of course, the focus of a lot of the mythology and the history, of course, there was some Greek and Roman, but primarily this is Antares, and the knowledge of it comes from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia. So fascinating walk through all of the different aspects of this, and I've kind of enjoyed doing this one today because it's so profound and yet so connected to our reality.
That's right. Yeah. And let's stay connected to our reality by using the true position of the planetary bodies. We might be crazy in your eyes by saying that this full moon is happening in Ophiuchus, but Ophiuchus is the 13th sign. She is Mother Earth, as David talked about.
Wisdom.
Sorry, Mother Wisdom. My fault. As I said it, I knew I was wrong. Mother God, the beautiful feminine energies that we all have. And the Sun is sitting in Taurus on the 31st of May. Use any night sky app to verify of what we are saying. If you've enjoyed this, you can sign up to our newsletter. Thank you for all those that have signed up so far. It's really exciting to see that our list is growing. Find all our videos on YouTube. Listen on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you so much for today, David. I've enjoyed it too, learning something new. Any parting words?
Nope, that's all from me.
Ngā mihi.
Namaste.
Until next time.